Nancy, I'm glad you could come and spend a little time with us today to talk about the importance of estate planning. Nancy and I have known each other for some time. I first came to know Nancy when she was speaking on a panel at one of the associations that I was a member of. And over the years, I've been able to come to understand her particular take on estate planning and really appreciate the way she does this with a passion towards helping families have what happens be what they want to have happen.
Right.
So you've been in practice in estate law for 25 plus years.
Actually, since my business formally formed in 1986.
Okay, so
that's
closing
like
in on
about
30 years, 32 years.
Yeah.
So, and you're over on David Road in Kettering.
Yes.
You serve 3,000, 3,500 families, businesses.
I don't count them, but our business manager does.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, that's her job, right?
Right.
So,
yeah.
okay. And I'm Keith Davis. I'm with Principal Financial Group. I have been in the financial services business for 38 years. We have a practice that works with individuals and business owners, and it's a full service financial advisory firm. And what I'd like you to share first with the people is that experience that you had early in life that first made you recognize how important it is to plan for the uncertainties of life.
I'm glad to, because that experience has really shaped who I am and what I do today. I married my college sweetheart, and after he got his MBA, we moved here to Dayton for his job, and then we had a baby, and then he was diagnosed with what then was called Hodgkin's disease, which is now called Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Yeah.
And we didn't have the internet then. So some friends, medical friends of mine, loaned me medical books, and I read up on Hodgkin's, and I thought that David had about 10 years and that we had maybe 10 years to plan and that sort of thing. But the moment of truth really hit me when I realized that Hodgkin's is a form of cancer and that David was no longer insurable and that he had $25,000 worth of life insurance.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that certainly created a lot of fear in me. And so that's when I learned to trust God a whole lot for my future. David did not live as long as was expected. That was over 40 years ago now, 41 years ago that he was diagnosed. He had his staging surgery and chemotherapy, and then a year later, a spot turned up on his lungs. He was given chemo and basically died of pneumonia during his chemotherapy.
Wow.
About a year later. And so our daughter, Amy, was 2, and I was 27, and David was 28. And so certainly when that $25,000 check was delivered and I realized that that's all I had, I needed to, I was working, thankfully.
Sure.
I had a decent job, but I knew that I needed to support my daughter and myself, theoretically for the rest of our lives. I wasn't going to count on getting married again, getting to support, having another husband to support me.
It was all on your shoulders.
It was all on my shoulders. So I had read a book by F. Lee Bailey called The Defense Never Rests. Back then, he was on the talk show circuit, and he was quite a flamboyant lawyer.
Right, very famous guy.
Yeah, very famous. And I got that book in the mail by mistake. Because I was a member of the Book of the Month Club and I forgot to send in my card. And I read it. And that is really the book that God used to call me to go to law school. And so then I quit my job and I found out, lo and behold, that as the mother of a small child, I could get Social Security.
Yeah.
So I applied to UD Law School and was accepted. And so during that time, we lived on our Social Security, and I used the $25,000 to pay my law school tuition. And I actually ran out of money my last semester, and my parents had to pay for my tuition. So I'm thankful that they were willing to do that.
Sure.
But all along, I realized, especially in estate planning class, I took Dale Searcy's estate planning class at UD Law School. I realized how much planning that we could have and should have done
Sure.
and hadn't done. And I went from being discouraged to angry.
You know, the story is interesting to me on a number of levels because I've been in this business now for a long time, and I've had things like that happen. That I've seen these things happen to families, and I've also seen many success stories where the bad thing doesn't happen, and that's what most planning gets put off because, in truth, most of the time the bad thing doesn't happen. But I can tell you, planning ahead can make a world of difference for when it does happen. I had a client when I was very young in the business who, for years, he had talked to me about wanting to start his own business. He was an engineer with General Motors, and he called me up one day in May. So this is probably 35 years ago. And he said, well, I did it. I've started a company and we're going to ship parts from the Vandalia plant for GM to Brazil for assembly down there. And so I've got this great contract. So I've rented a building and I've hired some people. I want you to come out and talk to me because I know I've got a lot of debt now and I need some more life insurance. And so that was on a Friday. No, it was like a Wednesday before Memorial Day. And I went out, we talked. I said, well, I will send you some information when I get back to my office. I'll prepare a couple of different ideas for you. And I'll put those in the mail to you. And then I'll call you on Monday. And I remember saying I'll call you on Monday because when Monday rolled around, it was Memorial Day. And I didn't call until Tuesday. And so I called the shop up outside of Tip City. And this man answered the phone in a kind of a gruff way and said, who are you? And I said, well, Jim introduced me to you last week. I'm so and so, and I was calling to talk to Jim. And he said, Jim died on Sunday.
Oh my.
And the story ends up with being very scary, very traumatic for his wife. She was a stay-at-home mom for the most part. But she did have a job as a part-time secretary for the Miami County Chamber of Commerce, which turned out to really be a big advantage for her because she had all these men that owned businesses that stepped up and helped her.
Great.
Because she had to step into her husband's shoes.
Sure.
And because they had a lease, they had employees, they had a contract. There was a business there. And over the course of 25 years, that became a real success story.
Wonderful.
It started off fraught with fear and uncertainty because Jim happened to have a congenital narrowing of the arteries coming into his heart. It was the same thing that killed the basketball player Lynn Bias. I'm sorry, Hank Gaithers. But in any event, these things all turn out, sometimes good, sometimes not. But my experience is that if you plan for the future, it's easier to sleep at night. And it's also when the bad thing happens, and it almost always does eventually, you're going to be much better prepared to do what needs to be done.
Right. Well, death is going to come.
Right.
It's just a matter of when.
Right.
And for some of it's sooner rather than later.
Right. And we just don't get to pick the date.
No. And I've seen those stories in the Young Widows support group that I've run with another lady, a couple other ladies for 28 years. Some of the women have come out okay financially, and others have had to file bankruptcy because of the financial circumstances and the poor planning.
Right.
I've seen the gamut.